The Rockies are dealing as we come up on the trade deadline. Welcome in. I'm Kainani Stevens. Paul Holden from Locked On Rockies with us because the trade deadline is approaching. So, of course, we're going to talk about some of these moves. Paul, the Rockies have been sellers so far as they're sending a couple people out of town to the Angels. What were your first thoughts when you saw the deal go through?
My first thoughts were, hallelujah. The Colorado Rockies are sellers at a deadline finally. Since I have been the host of this podcast, I haven't really ever been able to jump in on the fun of the Colorado Rockies. Even my dog here is excited about the Rockies making some moves. Look, this year is a wash for the Colorado Rockies. They're not making the playoffs. They're not winning the division. They're not going to do these big things. They're not even going to play 500 ball like they expected to play. With the starting pitching injuries and all these things, the best thing the Rockies can do, sell off these veteran contracts, especially of players that most likely aren't going to be here in the long term, and get pitching prospects. Now, I don't know too much about these young guys the Rockies just got just yet, but from my initial responses from Locked On Angels and from people, they say this is a good move. Honestly, any move the Rockies make to move on from some of these expiring veteran contracts is a win, especially when the Rockies have been so inactive at the trade deadline the past couple of years. The biggest issues being, of course, losing Trevor Story and John Gray for just one draft pick and their inactivity there. It's really, really encouraging to see the Rockies willing to make these moves and doing it because, hey, there's, like I said, this year, total wash. Let's hope for the future.
And you have to be happy with pitching prospects because you can never have enough pitching. So there's always time to work on that. What are the Angels getting out of this deal? What are they sending out there to LA?
Well, here's the deal. You know what? These two guys are guys that are going to add power. They add offense, and they add veteran presence to your lineup. These aren't bad players. These aren't players that necessarily make your team worse or I think are going to be downgrades. I think the Angels are actually probably going to get an upgrade at first base. CJ Cron, since returning from the IL, has been on a tear, especially with the power. The biggest thing that you can hope for these two players is their power returns. Randal Grichuk hasn't quite ever been the power player that the Rockies hoped that they were going to get, but he's been someone that has been great for the Rockies, batting over 300 at least going into this final game here against Oakland in the series, putting up a couple of home runs. Two players that suffered some injuries this year but have bounced back in great ways and add veteran presence, especially when it comes to offense. I mean, it's a slam dunk. You know, I think maybe if you're looking there, oh, the Rockies got to send a little bit of money, but I mean, Coors Field was packed this weekend to just watch the Rockies play the A's in a season when both of those teams are highly irrelevant. So that's not something you have to worry about. And are these players that are necessarily going to make the Angels immediate contenders? I don't necessarily know you can say that, but these are two guys with massive home run potential, and Randal Grichuk can play any position in the outfield that you need him to, and he's been good this year. He's not necessarily going to be a Gold Glove defender, but he's not going to be a negative either, especially if you stick him in the corners, and CJ Cron can play a fine first base. You don't necessarily need a ton of defense there, but if those guys are able to swing the bat as well as they're capable of, they're getting a couple of guys that can hit home runs, and CJ Cron's hit a couple of 500-foot bombs, and they're two guys that are familiar with the Angels already, having time being in with the Angels already. So I think it's a little bit of a homecoming and a move that makes total sense for both sides.
For Colorado, they're sending two guys out. They're getting a couple prospects back. Is this going to turn into a fire sale situation? Do you see any other moves on the horizon?
You know, listen, if you got one-year deals, you got veteran players for the Colorado Rockies that are getting any sort of interest, I think you make the trade. The biggest hit the Rockies are going to take this year is the PR hit that they will suffer their first 100-loss season of their franchise history. Now, that's tough, and it's not something you necessarily want to deal with, but the Rockies are dealing with an incredible amount of injuries to their starting pitching staff and some key players. And at this point, if you're getting anything back for some of these veteran players on expiring contracts, Why not? These prospects still need to pan out and develop, but the Rockies needed pitching depth across the board when it comes to their farm system. So if you can keep getting pitching prospects, because really that's what you need to focus on. The Rockies don't necessarily need to go and dive into a lot of position players. They have young guys playing in a lot of the positions. They have contracts filling some of these areas. The Rockies getting pitching prospects back for really anybody this year, especially on deals that are expiring this year or next, that's a total win. I mean, especially because you're thinking the Rockies aren't going to keep a lot of these veteran guys, as they're hoping to use the rest of this season as an expanded look at some of these young guys, which is long overdue and really refreshing. As much as it's a bummer to see some of these guys go, Grichuk and Cron are solid players and have had some good moments in purple. This is what the Rockies need to do. This is the process you need to go through. This is how you build that depth, especially when you consider yourself a team that's able to draft and develop players.
Well, Paul, we're happy to get you in on the trade action for once. Maybe not
Woo!
done yet. Still got a couple days left, so maybe we'll talk to you again.
Absolutely.
I know Locked On Rockies will have everybody covered with all the details of the goings and back and forth and what exactly they're getting out of the deal. So thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks you. Thanks so much. And as always, go Rockies.